check.
All right, tonight we have something special for you. We have expert panelists who have pioneered some of the world's best design systems and design system approaches at companies such as Shopify, Atlassian, Intuit and QuickBooks, Salesforce, Adobe, The Guardian, the BBC, and LinkedIn. Yes, and the Financial Times. Yeah, that's a lot of companies, a lot of awesome design systems, and it's just these three people representing all of those. So it's going to be a special night here. We're going to dive deep into the nitty-gritty of what makes a design system work and focus on how to keep design systems in sync with code. Notably, we're not going to cover much about what design systems are or aren't, or any of that stuff that's become exhausted over the past couple of years. If you're looking for that sort of material, I'd suggest Googling any of our panelists. They have plenty of prior art in that direction. At the end, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A, about 20 minutes actually. So just keep that in mind and write down any questions you might have. So first, our panelists, who are they? Maybe we could just do a lap through and you could each introduce yourself and talk a little bit about why design systems chose you.
Hey, so I'm Kelig. I used to be a web designer in France, and then I migrated towards front-end and quite a bit of UX as well. And then I decided speaking French was not great for the whole software learning opportunities that we have there. So I moved to England, and then I was really lucky to work on design systems with folks at the BBC, The Guardian, and at the Financial Times, and learned a ton there. Then I moved over the big pond and came to Salesforce to work on the Lightning design system, just through having chats with Gina. She was like, oh, I suppose you're looking for a job. I suppose I am. Cool, come in. It was that simple. So that was cool. And then 2 years ago, I joined Shopify to work on their design systems tooling. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I got into design systems by happy accident. I learned how to code and design on Photoshop 5.0 and Neopets. Any Neopets people in the room? Yeah. All right. So I went to school for graphic design after that, thinking that's what that was. Turns out it wasn't. So I transferred into a major called New Media Design, which was a little bit of everything, animation, programming, UI, UX, pretty much all the things. Turns out I really liked code, and I went full-time as a front-end software engineer at LinkedIn right after I graduated. Went pretty far down the core product path. I was working on LinkedIn.com's profile, which is pretty core, but it wasn't my thing. And I was pulled off of that sometime during the whole shenanigans to refactor 4 megabytes of CSS into a BEM syntax. Most people would be like, oh my god, that sounds terrible. And it was, but actually I loved it. And I decided I wanted to do more of that stuff. So I moved on to a job at Adobe. My title was experienced designer, but it became design engineer a few months in when they realized I was a bit of a hybrid. And from there I helped out on the tooling side of our design system, just being basically a plumber, automating the things and trying to keep up the code quality and the design quality across the company. No small job. And now I'm at Atlassian, where I'm a senior front-end developer, and I am also still doing tooling work, specifically focused on design tokens.
Yeah. All right. And Joe? Joe needs a mic.
How you doing? I used to beatbox back in the day, so I'm getting a mic, but
prove it.
That's only on 3 lines too. Where do you see me on Clubhouse? Okay, sorry. Hey guys, I'm Joe Preston, Director of Design for Intuit. I started with Intuit about 4 years ago, and I worked on the Harmony design system, which is one of the earlier design systems actually out there. Slowly we've evolved it. Now there's an Intuit wide one. Before that, I ran a creative agency where we did enterprise UX design called Momentum, and we started selling companies design systems. So that's where I first got exposed to them. I did some meetups around the Bay, Austin, and New York called Enterprise UX. Ran that for 6 years. Learned a lot of amazing people. I was actually speaking at an AIGA event with Gina Ann, who was one of my K-Leagues. I think it was like your first day on the job or something. But I met K-League, and he was the design token guru at the time. And that was actually the day I got poached by the Intuit recruiter. Was the day I met you.
I should mention that Kayla also introduced me to the people that got me my job, so
Yeah.
yay Kayla.
Kayla got all of us.
Does anyone else need a job?
And you get a job.
All right, cool. So let's not spend too much time setting the stage and just pretend like we all know what design systems are. But let's do a little bit of that. And let's do that in the form of talking about what problems are design systems solving, and how does this need to be tailored to each organization?
Okay, so for me, the main thing that design systems are solving is language. Having this documented way of referring to things, whether it's colors, whether it's any type of patterns, any cultural aspect of your UX workflow, or how you ship. Anything that UXers and developers can refer to with this exact same language is just fluidifying the entire ideation to production kind of process. So for me, that's what a design system is all about.
I would say it's about a lot of things, but a design system to me is frankly a tool for just almost furthering the evolution of the way that design works in companies. We've always had design historically as maybe it was a service or you were embedded on a product team, but it's never been in one centralized place and also integrated into the product path. So the way that UI components match up with the traditional development process and also bring designers into the fold on the whole product shipping path is really significant to me. And it solves, of course, all of the efficiency things that we've been redoing by hand for so many years.
Yeah, I agree. I think ultimately they solve an efficiency for the business. For software as a whole, I think design systems are a sign that software is maturing. It's a factor of industrialization, right? And outside of software, you have countless industries that have gone through these phases where they develop standards and they build these tools that bridge the ideation, the design, and the fabrication process together. And I think we're just like going through that right now, just like a lot of other industries have gone through.
Cool. One of those things that is kind of the connective tissue for the whole design system is the documentation. And there's the saying, if it isn't documented, it doesn't exist. How do you go about creating meaningful documentation for both designers and developers using the design system?
So at Shopify, we've got, so if you go to polaris.shopify.com, you get a website that is both targeted to designers and developers. And by designers, I mean pretty much everyone included in the design process. So we've got content strategists, researchers, and product designers. And developers get the code in the same place as we display the content guidelines and all the pattern guidelines to design. So for example, even our colors are documented in a way that makes sense both to designers but also to developers with some code snippets here and there. So for us, that's how we do it. It's not necessarily the easiest path because sometimes Conway's law gets in the way of you shipping different experiences for developers, for designers, for backend developers, for marketing. Anyway, so yeah, for us having this integrated experience has been pretty successful. We've had some feedback that sometimes it was too content heavy or too design heavy or too developer heavy, and guess what, we just adjusted a few knobs here and there on the website, and it turns out people are liking it, and we see adoption really, really high in people's workflows. So it's possible. It's not easy to do, but it's possible.
Documentation is a fun subject. I don't know if anybody's super figured it out. I certainly haven't. I've been through 2 projects at this point that were about just consolidating the designer documentation and the developer documentation, because sometimes at the beginning of your system, a developer will try and do something like auto-generate everything and make your website an artifact of your deployment of your code repository. And that's super great, except when it's separate to the design stuff. And when that grows, and it usually does the job for quite a while, things just kind of get out of sync. And this is the second time where I've been on a project that's about consolidating those, and the process of doing that actually has highlighted a bunch of things that we did not know about. Either it's versioning or it's inconsistencies, because when you're presenting, as Kayleigh said, your design and development experiences together, you are saying that these are the same thing, and if they're not, then that's probably confusing to your users. So I would hope that these are intertwined at the beginning if possible, and hope that we can leverage as much automation as possible in that workflow. Apart from that, I don't think there needs to be one place. As long as the content is consistent, and you can do this by serving your content from like a content API, like Contentful. I would love to be able to meet people where they are. So if it means delivering documentation in the design tools, or even code hints in VS Code plugins, that I think is really where the next frontier on documentation will be.
Yeah, I think what you hinted on the last, actually, Roulon Gia there in the back, who was on our systems team. We went through a rewrite of our design system, and boy, you learn a lot when you have to overhaul a design system in terms of documentation. And some of the things you think about are what will be preserved the next time you redo your design system, and how would you do it again? And so, like Kayleigh was mentioning, we would look at what were people searching for to try to understand where was their intent, and things like content, the actual content guidelines were some of our highest used areas of our design system, so that became a focus. And then we had really verbose usage guidelines, like for designers, where you could, taken from material, you could just, with do's and don'ts, explain something that would take you 3 paragraphs with like 2 pictures. So thinking about that, and then we spent a lot of time thinking about, it depends on the size of your organization, but if you're going to have multiple contributors outside of your systems team to the documentation itself, you want to try to make your documentation as accessible as possible while still having some level of governance. That's a really hard thing to do, but those are the things we have thought a lot about for documentation.
I'd like to add something about documentation. So I love what you said, Sarah, about meeting your users where they are. And so we're super lucky at Shopify. We've got some amazing interns. And so a developer intern built, so Polaris.shopify.com has a GraphQL API, which means that all of the content and coding example are accessible through an API. It enabled 2 people to build really cool tools out of it. And one of them is for developers. So I can't remember exactly how it works, but essentially the idea is to show documentation on components when people are actually building in code. And the other tool is from a guy who now left Shopify for Figma. So he was really into design tooling, and he created this sketch plugin that if you're selecting a button or if you're selecting a card in Sketch, it's going to show you the documentation for that component. And it's so powerful for designers who just want to have a quick look really quickly without leaving their tool, without context switching at, okay, what is the best way to write a title for a card, for example, and then get that documentation right in Sketch.
I used your GraphQL API to pitch the same thing at Adobe.
Yes.
Nice. Speaking of documentation, Kaylee, I know you and your team at Shopify just released the icon system, and you open sourced it. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that's a great solution for you and also others.
Yeah, so we did a lot of research, and we found out that our designers and our developers were really unsure of how it looked like to get an icon from an idea to production. And it was like super seamless, essentially. So all that, we kind of knew that, but that research validated it. And then we were like, okay, what is the best way for us to come up with it? Okay, here's a designer who creates an icon or needs an icon, and here is it in production across mobile, web, etc. And we're like, well, the first step is where do the icons live? What is the governance process? Who builds the icons? How much context do we have on why those icons were built? And we figured, okay, let's create an entire database and a continuous integration process that supports this ideal model of a designer needs an icon to it gets in production. And because Shopify is it's a commerce platform, we have people building kind of plugins for shops. And so we want them to use our system to build coherent experiences that blend really well within the Shopify ecosystem. So we also open sourced it. So if you go to polaris-icons.shopify.com, you'll find our 366, I think last time I checked, system icons with as much documentation as possible, calls to action just in case someone wants to request a new version for this icon. Yeah, I'm trying to remember all the details of the project that might make sense to this audience, but yeah, oh yeah, and you can search for icons, obviously. We've also tagged each icon with different keywords that represent synonyms for that icon. So let's say somebody is wondering what looks like an X. So we've tagged all the icons that kind of signify close, delete, X, trash, blah, blah, anything that kind of goes back to that concept with the appropriate keywords. And so far, we've got more than 200 people every day at Shopify internally using it. And we're looking forward to getting the partners, the app developers to also use that. And it's a huge departure from the inefficiency that people didn't even know if icons were available in production. If they didn't know, it meant sometimes they would ask the designer, hey, can you just export that icon for me? It would end up being duplicated in multiple areas of the code base, which for performance is not great because we would serve the same icon in multiple file names, etc. Anyway, it was bad. It's better. We've also built tooling for developers to tell them which part of their code base could be using our icons instead. So we look at the file names, we look at the shape of the icons, and we're like, oh, you know what? That exists in the system. You might want to look at this. Yeah, and there's a ton of. I could speak for hours about this topic, so I'm just going to stop there.
Is there a blog post coming?
It's tempting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you just heard the blog post. So.
TLDR. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to warn Sarah and Joe. We're about to jump into talking about UI components, but I want to give you the opportunity to delay that by talking more about icons, if you wish to. I know, Sarah, you at Adobe worked on a system called Element, and there's other interesting things out there like the Octacons workflow with continuous integration from Figma and that sort of thing. So, opportunity to talk more about that, or we can jump into UI components.
We will save Ellen for UI components, but I will talk a little bit about icons because they're crazy. I'm not going to pretend I ever have had them figured out, but we did have one engineer that worked full-time because at Adobe there were a gajillion icons, and by a gajillion I mean there were 2,000 in Photoshop alone. And there was a team of 4 designers sequestered in Germany whose full-time job was to make icons. The problem was they were trying to get those icons into Artifactory, which for designers is like crazy, and for developers it's still crazy. So we had somebody actually building a tool that was, shoot, I don't even remember the name of it, but it was for the designers to help distribute their icons and for people to go and get icons and request icons. It seems to be working now. I mean, it was working when I left, so let's hope it's still working. As far as in our libraries, we had an icon component that if you passed it the name of the icon that you wanted, would pull the appropriate dimensions and files from the repository that was based off of that system. So I'm actually working on, so ask me in 2 weeks, because we are trying to figure out how to theme our design system for Atlassian for Trello. And that will mean making all of our icons replaceable to coincide with Trello's brand. So hopefully we will have a better answer in a couple weeks.
I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. I'm happy to hear Kelly go from like typography to now you're talking about icons, so that's amazing.
Well, we've got...
Icon fonts.
Oh no, don't do that.
Yeah, no thanks.
Sorry, backtracking.
Okay, so let's switch to something a little harder. And let's not talk about design tokens yet. Let's just talk about design or UI components in general. What strategies do you and your teams employ for staying on track with UI components and making them reusable?
For when we built an Intuit-wide design system, it was important to think about contribution, and so we have, actually we took this idea from Salesforce Lightning of having a labs contribution level, which is a very minimal set of standards of enforcement, but still available for teams to use. And then a whole nother set of standards to graduate it to like the official library, which include like writing all the theming, accessibility, all that sort of stuff. But I think for UI components, we spent a lot of time thinking about how would you scale teams outside of the design system contributing to it without having to bear the brunt of all of the systemization.
Do you want to start talking about contribution, or I already forgot the question? Sorry.
Reusability was the...
Yeah, we're talking about reusability within the context of UI components. And we can move into something that extends that if you're ready for a transition.
We can make our way there. So let's start with reusability, though. I think that it's a little bit of a balance. There's always this internal struggle on design systems on how flexible you want to be versus how consistent you want to be, and what constraints you want to introduce. And reusability tends to be a lot of the reasoning behind that. And it's something that you really have to think about with your team, because if your team is small and nimble, you can introduce things with very full experiences and a lot of constraints that will work for your needs, and if somebody has something that they need to add, they can just come to you. But at bigger systems with a lot of products, it becomes a more difficult balance, because there might be a team that wants to do one thing and you don't know if they really need that, or they might override it on their own. But them overriding it on their own means that you no longer can keep track of those changes and bring them back into your system. So sometimes you choose to make something really flexible, even if it might break your design standards used in some certain way, just so you have the ability to ship to all these different teams and have some modicum of consistency regardless. I don't have a super good answer. I think it really depends on your team and on your org and on your personal judgment and how flexible your brand is.
Cool.
Just speak to that because, like, literally yesterday I had a one-on-one with my manager Jesenia, and she was asking me. We've got this research that shows us that people want more composability and more flexibility. And why is it that we constrain people to certain types of things in our React component library? And it didn't happen by accident. It is very deliberate. So for example, let's say you build a card component and you allow people to put a title in there it's just text. And all of a sudden a team comes to you and says, you know what, I want to have text, but inside of it I want some italics, or I want an icon. And you're like, well, you're the first team to ever ask this. What is the user need? Like, you really need to understand why they're asking for this. You can't just willy-nilly say, yeah, totally fine, go ahead, do that, we'll just open the floodgates. Because once the cat is out of the bag, you have to maintain this API that allows for anything in your component to happen. And testing gets harder. You have to write the test cases. You have to write, if you're using something like Storybook, we'll probably talk about this later. This also comes into play. If you're doing regression testing, this also comes into play. Every time you add something to your system, a possibility, it really puts a maintenance tax on the system, on the team who built the system. And also, you haven't validated yet if it's a successful variant. So can you potentially go to production, validate that it works, it's great, people love it, and then get back to the system and say, well, now every team can do this because it's shown to be good from a user perspective. So it's kind of the dilemma, and we're trying to be very conservative initially, and then open little bits of possibilities later.
I think it's the role of design systems to be conservative in this regard. So at Intuit, what we've done is, kind of like Kaylee was talking about, is we developed a principles framework, which we call fixed, flexible, free. And these are what elements of your UI components can you agree upon across business units or teams are fixed, meaning you cannot change them, and the design systems team is the only one that could change them. Flexible, meaning it's something we'll build into the API that teams can localize or change or adapt. Free, meaning it's free, it probably shouldn't even be in the design system at all. But explaining that to all of the teams, whether it's an engineer or a design team, so they actually use a common language, was important to us. And then something else you mentioned, which is the design systems team has to have visibility into what every team is doing and doing research. I'm actually glad you brought up research. And that's really important because if you see one team adopting or building a new custom component, and then you see 2 or 3 teams using that same component, and now they start to have data that shows it's very successful with the customer, well, the job of the design system team is to consider that as, should this be like a durable contribution to the library, right? Because otherwise, you're not really doing your job as a team,
So Sarah, you at one point said not making a decision is a decision, and one of those decisions that can really bite you if you put off is versioning your design system. And if you don't do it, bad news in the future. So if we could quickly, I think we probably have about 5 minutes left total before Q&A, so we might need to kind of jaunt through this. But are there any strategies that you all have found for versioning your design system, keeping them in sync with code, and dealing with deprecation and release schedules?
No.
Well, we're done here.
Yeah. Yeah, so design debt is this idea that if you do not set expectations and make a decision about something, somebody else will, and you probably will not like the result. So with versioning, that might be that you set out on a cadence and you start versioning things and you're breaking a lot of stuff and people are mad at you, and then you release new versions because you're breaking stuff, and then they expect you to maintain the old versions, but you don't have people for that, so it gets kind of crazy. The system that I think has the most potential is to do a stable version, and with that you can take advantage of some marketing and do like a bi-yearly or quarterly release and like coincide with conferences or whatnot. And then maintain that stable version plus your newest version, and those might be all the updates that people need to consume. It might be just developer updates, and it might just be design updates. Everybody wins.
Yeah. So yeah, I liked what you did at Adobe with Precursors, where you could allow people to come in and contribute completely new and interesting ideas to the system, while the stable version, you mentioned, was living on a stable path. We're trying to experiment with that at Shopify to let people fork components, for example, or come up with their own ideas, and scale that in a way that when we want to pull them back into the system, it's not going to be a huge cost. Yeah, I think you know.
I don't have a comment here other than we try to do our versioning just like all our other internal, either open source or inner source teams do versioning. We try to actually get on schedules with some of the other teams when they do releases. And then I remember actually it was a lightning talk about how you guys were deprecating how you would deprecate a token, how you would like do a prefix for it, and there was a set amount of time.
18 months.
Yeah, if ever. I hope that was
Enterprise.
Yeah,
That's enterprise design system for you.
that was genius.
I'll just add real quick that because I learned all these lessons and we've seen this happen in the industry for so long, when I came on at Atlassian and my first project was to think about design tokens, we took an entirely new approach to it because a lot of companies will just ship these things and they're like, oh, we have colors and fonts, it's really easy, and we actually decided to take a full 2 sprints of just researching, talking to teams that have done this, researching possible tool sets, deciding on the entire life cycle of a token and how we're going to version that. And so we're able to say with confidence that we understand the landscape that we're working in, and we know what the expectations will be, and we're able to say those to all the consumers.
Very cool. All right, we're out of time, so we're going to switch to Q&A. A stands for applause, by the way, so let's give them a quick round. We have a limited number of mics, as you could tell by the dance we were doing up here. So I'm going to switch over to Zach for Q&A, and he'll answer any questions about Diez as well. So,
and a round of applause for Taylor for his amazing moderation.